Good evening. I'm Sarah Watson, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's show, A Conversation with Harriet Tubman, performed by Kathryn Harris. Tonight, Harriet Tubman will tell us about her life, her work on the Underground Railroad, and her involvement in the Civil War. Tonight's performance is part of the series that we've been running called Looking for Lincoln Conversations. For more information about our conversations, you can go to our Looking for Lincoln Facebook page. I'm pleased to say that the program tonight is funded by Illinois Humanities. It is now my most distinct pleasure to introduce Harriet Tubman.
Good evening. I want to thank y'all for inviting me. I want to thank y'all for inviting me so I can tell you about the work that I've done on the railroad. Now, you may think it odd that I, a woman, worked on the railroad, but I did work on the railroad, the Underground Railroad, that is. Now, before we go any further, and so there won't be no misunderstanding, I have to tell you something. And that is, the Underground Railroad, why, it wasn't even underground. The Underground Railroad, why, it wasn't even a railroad in the true sense of the word. So if it wasn't underground and it wasn't a railroad, then what, pray tell, was it? Well, I'll tell you that too. But I have to tell you this little story first. You see, a story has it that there was this slave, and he was making his escape. Now, that's a mighty risky and dangerous thing for a slave to do, escape, or at least try to anyway. But nevertheless, this slave was being chased by a slave catcher. And the captain of the slave catchers come up to him and he said, "Sam, what happened to that slave you was a chasing?" And Sam said, "I don't rightly know, sir. He must have caught some underground road because he just plumb disappeared." Now, like I said, the railroad was neither a railroad nor was it underground. So what, pray tell, was it? Well, I'm going to tell you. What the railroad really was a rate of freedom for the escaping slaves. I didn't tell you my name, did I? Well, my name is Harriet Tubman. I was born in Dorchester County, Maryland. Now, I was born in 1820. Could have been 1821. Could have been 1822. It might even been 18 and 23, because you see, don't nobody care about no slave having a birthday. But I was born because I'm standing here before you today. Now, on that plantation where I was born there in Dorchester County, Maryland, was owned by a man whose name was Master Brodus. And on Master Brodus's plantation, I worked out in the timber with my papa, and I got to be as strong as any man. But you see, I had heard about something called freedom, and I decided I wanted to have me some of that. So in 1849, I decided that I was going to be free. And with the help of those kindly abolitionist folks, did I tell you about them abolitionist folks? Those abolitionist folks believed that slavery was wrong. They believed that no man should own another. And with their help, those abolitionist folks, I got to my freedom. And I'm going to tell you, when I got to my freedom, those abolitionist folks told me that if I got, not when I got, but when I got from Dorchester County, Maryland to Philadelphia, that I would be free. And with the help of those kindly abolitionist folks, I got to Philadelphia and I got to my freedom. And I want y'all to know that when I got there to Philadelphia, I looked at my hands, I looked at my feet, same hands, same feet, except for one thing, they was free. And such a glory come over me was almost more than I could stand. Those kindly abolitionist folks also told me that when I got there to Philadelphia, I should look for a man whose name was Mr. William Still. Now, Mr. William Still was a free colored man. He was not a slave. Mr. Still was an important colored man as well. You see, Mr. Still was the secretary to the Anti-Slavery Society right there in Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. But more important than that, Mr. Still was a station master on the Underground Railroad. So like I said, when I got there to Philadelphia, I looked up Mr. Still, I found him, and Mr. Still, he and I became very fast friends. And over time, Mr. Still taught me all about the work of the Underground Railroad. Now, while I was there in Philadelphia, I hired myself out as a cook and a washerwoman. And with the money that I earned, I give it back to Mr. Still because you see, it takes money to operate the Underground Railroad. So, long about in 1851, Mr. Still decided that since I, Harriet Tubman, had made my own escape to freedom with the help of those kindly abolitionist folks that I told you all about, he decided that I might be the kind of person who could be a conductor on his railroad. So long about 1851, I started making my trips as a conductor on the Underground Railroad. And I want y'all to know that one of the very first trips that I took, I went right back to Dorchester County, Maryland. I went right back to Master Broadus's plantation. And I took away to freedom my brothers and their families, took them all the way up into Canada, where they could truly be free. Now, over time, I made about 13 trips on that railroad. I led scores of my people from slavery to freedom. Now, on that railroad, we mostly traveled at night. We hid in the day. At night, we'd follow that drinking gourd, follow that North Star, because you see, all roads that lead north, they lead to freedom. Well, like I said, I made about 13 trips on that railroad. Pretty soon, though, we start hearing about the rumblings of a war. That'd be the Civil War, you know. And during that war, I, Harriet Tubman, I served as a spy and a nurse in Mr. Lincoln's army. Never did get no fair pay for my service, but I done it anyhow because it was for the cause of freedom. Well, that war run on all the way to 1865, and back in 1863, Father Abraham, that's what we called him, Father Abraham, he gave out that Emancipation Proclamation. And then 1864 and 65 had two more amendments to that United States Constitution. And if you mix all of that together, we have the end, the abolition of slavery right here in these United States. So it wasn't no more need for the railroad. So it just closed up. During that war, though, aside from serving as a scout and a spy and a nurse, I want y'all to know, because of that proclamation Father Abraham gave out, it said that if any escaping slave would get to where Union forces was occupying in Confederate territory, and if they would vow their allegiance to the Union Army and fight for the cause of freedom, then at the close of the war, he'd get his freedom. And I want y'all to know that now on to 20,000 of my folks served in that Civil War. United States colored troops. Our freedom wasn't just given to us. We bled, fought, and died right alongside those white Union soldiers. So like I said, the close of the war, there was still work to do for the cause of freedom. And I, Harriet Tubman, I done that work as well. But I forgot to tell you this. During my time on the railroad, long about in 1855, before that war started, there was a bounty. There was a reward for my capture. That bounty money started at about $12,000. But by the time 1855 come, it had grown all the way to $40,000. But you know what? Nobody never could claim it because nobody never could catch me. And I'm going to tell you why. It's because I, Harriet Tubman, I never run my train off the tracks and I never lost a passenger. All of those who traveled with me, they all got the freedom. But that war come on and I served as a scout, a spy, and a nurse. They asked me to serve as a scout because I knowed about where all of the munitions was and the bridges, and I knew the landscape very well. Those Union Army generals was glad to have my help. Well, the war come to a close. There were amendments to the Constitution, but then there was still work to do for the cause of freedom. And at the close of that war, I worked for the Freedmen's Bureau. Now, do y'all know what the Freedmen's Bureau is? I know some of you probably know, and some of you probably don't. So I'm going to tell you what the Freedmen's Bureau was. Funny as it might sound, the Freedmen's Bureau was started by the federal government to help them former slaves learn how to be free. What that Freedmen's Bureau done was it taught them former slaves how to present themselves for work. They already knew how to work, having been a slave and all. But how to present themselves for work, get paid for their labors, and keep the money for themselves and be their own masters for a change. But I'm going to tell you, the best thing that Freedmen's Bureau done was taught them former slaves how to read and write. Because in slavery days, against the law, teach a slave how to read and write. Well, long about in 1869, war was over, work in the Freedmen's Bureau was done. I settled in a place called Auburn, New York. And you know my mama and my papa that I told you I took all the way up into Canada? Well, at the close of the war, I went back up into Canada and I brought them back across the falls. That'd be Niagara Falls. And I settled then in Auburn, New York. So now, there in Auburn, folks say that I operate an old folks home because I brought my mama and my papa there to take care of them. But I also open my home to other former slaves who's old and getting up in years and don't have no one to care for them. So the folks there in Auburn say that I operate an old folks home, and I reckon I do. I operate an old folks home right there in Auburn, New York. So now I just kind of reflect. I think about the work that I done on the railroad. And I want y'all to know it was risky work, it was dangerous work, but I was mighty glad that I done it. Now, before I go tonight, I'm wondering if there might be any of you who might have a question that you'd like to ask me about my work on the railroad. Or anything else. You can ask me anything you want. I don't want you to be shy. So, anybody got a question out there for me?
Well, thank you, Harriet. I've enjoyed listening to you. And for those in our audience, if you'd like to ask Harriet a question, please type it in the comment section and we will try to get through as many questions as possible. But to start us off, perhaps you can share that after you took your freedom and you escaped and went north, what compelled you to go back 13 different times to free others?
Well, ma'am, I really like that you say I took my freedom, because that's just exactly what I did. Now, do you know what it means to take your freedom? It means you just put one foot in front of the other and you just keep on walking for the cause of freedom. And that's what I done. But when I got there to Philadelphia, a free state, those abolitionist folks had told me that when I got there, I would be free. But when I got there, I was all alone. And I needed to share my freedom with others, especially my family and friends. So that is what compelled me. I guess that means, that's kind of a big word. That's kind of what made me want to go back, because I went back for my family to get them to be free. And then there was others that wanted to be free. So as long as anybody wanted to be free and wanted to travel with me and do as I say, because I am in charge, then that's just what it is. That kind of answer your question, ma'am?
Yes, and we've actually had quite a few questions come in. So here we go. This one is from Peggy. She would like to know about the blackouts that you suffered.
Why, Miss Peggy, how do you know? How do you know that I had blackouts? I wonder if she read about it somewhere, huh? Because I did have those blackouts. You see, when I was long about a teenager, I got hit in the head with a weight. Now you're probably wondering how that come to pass. Well, Master Brodus, he had sent me, and I'll just call him Sam, my friend, and I into town to the general store to get some provisions. You know, the things that we need to keep the plantation going, some flour and meal and, you know, things like that. And so Sam decided that this might be a good time for him to try to make his escape to freedom. So he said, Minty, oh, I didn't tell y'all that. I was born Araminta Ross. Folks call me Minty for short. So he said, Minty, this is what I want you to do. I want you to kind of occupy the mind and the business of the storekeeper. And when he is so busy worrying about you and what you're going to do, I'm going to try to make my escape out into the woods and to freedom. Well, it sounded like a good idea to me, except that the storekeeper must have got wind of what we was trying to do, because he picked up that 2-pound weight and hurled it, trying to stop Sam, hit me in the head, knocked me plumb out, caused me to suffer them spells. My mama, her name was Harriet Greenross. She told me to give me the sleeping sickness. But you know what? It's during them sleeping sicknesses that I communicate and talk to the man upstairs. Y'all know who that is, the man upstairs. He gives me what I need to know, where I need to go, and how I need to get there, because he talks to me. And I talk to him too. And I want y'all to know that I have been talking to him for a long time, and I still talk to him today. Because where the good Lord leads you, he will not leave you. And he has never left me yet. Do you think that answered her question well enough, ma'am?
I do. I think that was a great answer, Harriet. All right, we have another question. This one is from Patty, and she wants to know if you were afraid.
Afraid of what?
Well, she doesn't specify, but I'm assuming when you were running away, perhaps, or when you went back and were helping free others.
Well, like I said, I had a relationship with the good Lord, and he was always with me. And he gave me the strength to do what I needed to do. So you can't be scared if you're trying to lead folks to freedom. You can't be. You have to be in charge and know what you're doing and where you can go and where you can't go and what you just have to know those things. I guess I had a little bit of afraid, but I didn't have time to think about it. I was too busy trying to get folks to freedom.
Okay. All right, here's our next question. Steve would like to know if you ever had a close call where you were almost captured.
Close don't count. But I will tell you about something that happened, and I guess you might consider it a close call. Well, one of the places that I would stop when I was leading my folks to freedom, I'd stop in Wilmington, Delaware. And it was in Wilmington, Delaware that I had a friend. His name was Thomas Garrett. Now, Thomas Garrett was a Quaker. And you know those Quakers, and there were other groups of religious folks, that worked for the abolition of slavery, but the Quakers was very known for that. And they also called themselves friends. And they were certainly friends to the escaping slaves. Now, Thomas Garrett lived there in Wilmington. And over time, Thomas Garrett sheltered nigh on to 2,500 folks on the way to freedom. Now, did you know it was against the law to be aiding and abetting fugitives? And if you was caught aiding and abetting fugitives, you could be thrown in jail. You could have your property confiscated. That means get it taken away. and you could be fined. Well, Thomas Garrett, he said he didn't care. That happened to him 3 times. He was thrown in jail. Property was confiscated, managed to get it back. But Thomas Garrett said he was going to keep on doing what he was doing for the cause of freedom. And so I stopped there at Thomas Garrett's one day with some of my passengers. That's what I call those who travel with me. I call them my passengers. And so Thomas Garrett said, Harriet, I changed my name to Harriet to honor my mother when I took my freedom, because I could do what I wanted. And so I named myself Harriet to honor my mother. So nevertheless, Thomas Garrett said, I have a friend across town and he has some provisions for you. So he told me how to get there. And so I went there. And when I got there, the provisions that he had to give us for our travels was live chickens on the foot.
Oh my.
So I said, oh my, how am I going to do this? So I tied them chickens all together and I had a little flour sack that I kind of stuffed them in, and they was just a squawking and a squawking. And as I was passing by, I noticed these white men sitting in front of this store. And up there posted on the wall was a picture. Now, I can neither read nor write, but I do know what I look like. And the poster said, wanted, Harriet Tubman, dead or alive. So I said, oh my, whatever am I going to do? So them chickens in this little bag, I kind of like pushed them out of the bag and they just started all running around. And them white men, they just started laughing. And they said, look at that little old colored woman chasing after them chickens. Little did they know that little colored woman was the same woman whose face was up there on that poster, wanted, dead or alive. I will tell you this though. We didn't have no chicken that night for dinner. We just kept walking for the cause of freedom. So I imagine you might consider that a close call.
Yes, I would definitely consider that a close call. All right, so here's our next question, and this one is from Cheryl. She would like to hear more about your life after the war. How did you spend your old age, or how are you spending your old age?
Well, as most folks spend in their old age, I just try to take care of myself. I have a little apple orchard on my property, so I make applesauce and I share the apples with the folks in the neighborhood, and I try to take care of these aged folks who are there in my house, in addition, to taking care of my mama and my papa. So we mostly just we just try to get by, and I really get by with the help of strangers who appreciate the work that I've done on the railroad, you see. And one of the folks that appreciated so much so, and to give me a word of thanks, was Queen Victoria from over there in England. She sent me a very beautiful shawl as a way to say thank you, and she sent me a little bit of coins, to help me carry on my work when I was in the midst of working on the railroad, and to thank me for the work I was doing. That kind of answer your question?
I think that does answer the question. Okay, we have a lot of questions and I'm trying to get through as many as possible.
I'll try to answer as many as possible.
All right. Roxanne would like to know more about your family. So could you talk about your siblings and your parents some more?
Well, I had brothers and sisters. One of my sisters, I don't even like for her name to cross my lips because she was sold south on New Year's Day. Sold south, and I never saw her again. Can you imagine having your brother or your sister sold away from you? But then if you have never been a slave, they called us chattel property. We was no better than a chair or a table. And master thought, he could do whatever he wanted to do with us. And I tell you, the separation of the family was one of the worst things. That was the most terrible thing about that slavery. I told y'all about my mom and my papa that I took on my last trip. And I took them up there to Canada where they could truly be free and join with my brothers and their families. On that particular trip, I even took the master's wagon for the first leg of my journey to go north up into Canada. Master Brodus, he had passed on, and he had sold his property, including my mama and my papa, to a new master. But I do believe that that's the worst thing. Separation of the family. The mama go one way, the papa go another way, the children go another way. It's just terrible. And like I said, my sister was sold off. So some of them at the close of the war and the amendments and all of that come back. Some of them come back from Canada West, especially St. Catharines and Buxton over there in Canada, but some of them just kind of stayed there. So, but it was only under the paw of the lion that an escaping slave could truly be free. Now, you probably wondered, what is under the paw of the lion? The Canada flag had a lion standing up on his back legs and he had his paw kind of cupped like this, and it was only under that paw of the lion that you could truly be free. And that was because of that 1850 fugitive slave law. Even if a slave was captured on free soil, he could be sold back into slavery. That was the terriblest thing. Terrible. You have another question, ma'am?
I do. Actually, it's a follow-up to the question that was just asked. Somebody specifically would like to know, and I just lost the question, how many siblings that you have? This was from Rebecca.
Oh, well, I had 2 more sisters and 4 brothers.
Wow.
So it was a big family, but we wasn't all able to be kept together as a family.
Yeah, you were all split up. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Patricia has a question. She wants to know how you used your faith to keep your focus on the cause and not on the problems in your way.
The faith is what kept me. It's what sustained me. It's what kept me going. Because I believe that the good Lord called me to do what I was doing. So therefore, I had my hand in his hand. And he was always with me.
Okay. Dennis would like to know approximately how old you were when you started on the Underground Railroad.
Well, does he know how to work with numbers? Because if he does, he can figure this out for himself. I said I was born somewhere between 1820 and 1823. I don't really know. I was born because here I am. But I started my work. I took my freedom in 1849. And then I was in Philadelphia for 2 years just working and for Mr. Steele there at the Anti-Slavery Society. And so I really started my work in 1851. That's when I took my first trip. So I guess if he can figure out how to work with numbers, then he can figure out how old I was.
According to my calculations, you were around 30 years of age when you.
All right then.
Right around 30 years of age, plus or minus a couple years, but.
Mm-hmm. I had got to be strong and powerful from the work that I did with my papa, working back in the timber, because my papa his name was Benjamin Ross. He was a trusted slave of Master Brodus. Master Brodus, he had like a lumber yard, timber. That's how he made his money between selling timber and selling us. That's how he made his money. So, but when you out there working, because I did work for Miss Susan, but I was not a very good working in the house. I spilled some sugar. I'd never had taste of sugar before. I spilled some on the table and then I tasted it and she saw me and she hit me and told me, get out there. So I never did work no more in the house, but I was very glad to work with my papa back in the timber. And while I was out there in the timber, my papa told me about all the plants that grow in the woods. He told me about, and I could recognize them. He told me about the plants that was good for medicinal purposes. Some of the plants that you better stay away from because they was poisonous and they kill you. And some of the plants that that you could eat. So I was but a child or a teenager when I was doing that, but I never know that it would come into good usage years later when I was on the railroad.
Okay, well, there's a follow-up question kind of on that same line about when you were on the Underground Railroad. Mir would like to know how you were able to feed everyone on your 13 different trips to liberate slaves.
We ate whatever we could find. Sometimes we would stop at the home of a kindly abolitionist person because we had been told that if we go, 3 miles down there and watch for, a quilt or a curtain be hanging on a rod, then that would be a good place for us to be a safe house. That's what they call them, safe houses. And so we would stop there and we'd hide out in the barn or in the hay. I've even hid in a back of a hay wagon filled with hay and potatoes. But that was one way for me to get from one place to another. So we mostly ate whatever we could, I guess you would call it foraging, whatever we could find, a rabbit or a squirrel or a coon or something. We just had to be careful about making a fire because if we make a fire, would bring people to us. So we just had to be very, very careful of all those kinds of things.
Okay.
But like I said, the good Lord was with us, so we managed to stay safe.
Okay, so here's a kind of question related to the quilts you just mentioned. Jane would like to know how quilts were used as part of the Underground Railroad.
Mostly a quilt is for keeping you warm. And that's all I'm going to say about that right now. And like I said, it could have been hung across a line or on a lamppost or something like that. But mostly they was just to keep you warm. That's what most quilters are.
Okay. All right. Hold on. There's a bunch more questions. All right. Here's one from Rich. He wants to know about a specific event. He says, Ms. Tubman, didn't you lead Union troops in the rescue of numerous slaves at one location?
Yes, sir. I remain to this day. I never heard nobody else had this honor on the Combahee River with General Saxon and General Montgomery. I'm the only woman to have led a raid during that Civil War. We went to this plantation over in the Sea Islands off the coast of Georgia on the Combahee River. We burned up the indigo, the sugar, just set the plantation all afire. But there was now to 700 folks there in bondage. And after we burned up the plantation, they all just followed us on to freedom. I'm the only woman that ever done that, ever, to this day, on the Combahee River. I believe it was 1864, might have been 63, somewhere along in there. Does that answer your question, I hope?
Yes, it did. All right, here is our next question.
How many more questions you got?
Well, you know what? We have a lot. I don't know if we're going to get to them all before our time runs out, but I'm trying. We have.
How are we doing for time, and how much time do we have?
It's up to 15 minutes left, but I don't know if we'll go the whole time, but we got quite a few more questions.
All right, I'll try to answer them.
People are very interested. All right. Terry asks, how were you able to get back and forth, transportation, money, and food? I think this is referring to when you were on the Underground Railroad. Like, how did you travel?
Well, I must say I've even been on a train, a real train, to get from one place to another on the railroad. And especially, though, during the war, I was on the train. But during the time, because when the war started in 1861, I had ceased my work pretty much. But mostly on the railroad, it was putting one foot in front of the other and having my passengers do the same way. Sometimes folks might give us a ride in a buggy or a wagon or something like that. And if we had a little lake or a stream or something like that, you just have to do what you got to do to get from one side to the other. You know, lot of folks who thought they didn't know how to swim, well, if they want to get to freedom, they sure learn fast. If freedom was on the other side of the lake. Mm-hmm. So I hope that kind of answered the question.
Yeah. All right. So here's a question. And this one is from her daughter, and her daughter's name is Taylin. And she wants to know, why did Harriet want to share her freedom with others?
Because freedom is such a precious gift. It is such a precious thing to have. And if you have something really good, then you want others to enjoy it also. And that's why when I took my freedom, it was such a good thing. I wanted my family and my friends to have the same joy that I had being free.
Okay. All right. Here's a question. Rebecca would like to know why you were called Moses.
Y'all know about Moses, don't you? Y'all know that Moses led his folks, who were slaves in Egypt, out of bondage. And so since I, Harriet Tubman, led my folks from slavery to freedom, folks call me Moses too. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm. All right, here is an interesting question.
They've all been interesting
Well,
questions.
that's true. They have. We've had really good questions. All right. So this question is, are there any stories that you remember particularly well, or any passengers on the railroad that struck a particular chord with you? I think what she's getting at, was there any like specific person that you remember helping to free specifically, or an incident or something like that?
It was so many that I led to freedom that they were all important to me, but probably the ones who was the most important was my mama and my papa. And they had stayed there till the very end, and they was my last passengers. So I remember them, of course, the most when I was working. And they stayed there. I have to tell you a little story. Master had come down because he had heard from other slave owners in the area that their slaves was just kind of disappearing, and so he come down and was talking to my mama and my papa, and asked my papa if he had seen me. Well, my papa, he wasn't stupid. He put a kerchief around his eyes so he would be blinded. And when Papa was asked by Master if he'd seen me, he said no. How could he see me? His eyes was covered. I thought that was kind of smart on Papa's part, because I was right there. I was just hiding out. Hiding in plain sight, so to speak. But Master he didn't know it. So
Okay.
Well,
Do you have something else?
Well, I was gonna take off my scarf and my gloves, because I have a few things that I would like to share.
Okay,
with the
so
audience.
Why don't you transition from Harriet to Kathryn?
And we have like 5 or 10 minutes or something like that?
Yes.
All right then. So when I take off my gloves, and I'm going to tell you why I wear gloves, sometimes I have on red fingernail polish, and Harriet Tubman did not wear fingernail polish. But today I have on navy blue fingernail polish. And then I'll take this scarf off. And I told y'all that I have this scar on my head, but right now I'm being Kathryn. So I'm taking this scarf off. Whew. Boy, my hair can breathe for a minute. And then I'm going to put on my glasses so I can truly see, because these glasses are my theater glasses, if you understand my drift. So anyway, but I did want to say a couple of things. I wanted to address the question that someone had asked about quilts. And the quilts and the Underground Railroad, it's more mythology than history. And I say that because you may have seen a couple of things. A pattern book that makes for an Underground Railroad quilt that has all of the different patterns in it, like the log cabin and the log cabin and the bow tie and various other blocks that symbolize whatever it is. Except that quilt with those patterns really did not come into common usage until the 1870s. So much as I said about quilts, they were mostly used for warmth. Their role on the Underground Railroad is more mythology than history. I think the mythology came by from telling stories that were made popular in a book called Hidden in Plain Sight by a woman who, it was like oral history. And that was by a woman whose name was Tobin. And that kind of got that story going. So I wanted to talk about that. Harriet Tubman died March the 10th, 1913. I don't know if folks can see this or not. Oh, that's because it's kind of got
kind of glare, but yeah, if you can you bend it down a little bit? There you go. That's good.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Harriet Tubman died March 10th, 1913 in Auburn, New York, and she passed away at her own old folks' home. She was probably in her 90s. Nobody really knows how old Harriet Tubman was because she didn't even know when her own birthday was because she was a slave. Another interesting, here's another photograph of a young Harriet Tubman. And this photograph was found a few years ago. It was newly discovered photograph of Harriet Tubman. And it was found in, I think it was like in 2016. And it was found in a book that was owned by a woman whose name was Emily Haviland, who was a known abolitionist in the Philadelphia area. And there were a whole bunch of other pictures, including Thomas Garrett and the Grimke sisters. All of those folks had been abolitionists and working for the abolition of slavery. And this picture was the last one in the book. You can't see it, but it has Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman could neither read nor write, so this is not her own signature. But the folks at the Library of Congress verified that, yes, this is Harriet Tubman, probably in her 30s, at the height of when she was doing work on the railroad. And this photograph is, it's in the collection at the, it's on display between the National Museum of African American History and Culture, which is a part of the Smithsonian institution, and the National Museum of American History. They jointly display it. The shawl that I mentioned as a gift from Queen Victoria is on display also at the National Museum of African American History. As on a very personal note, I had the honor to go to Dorchester County, Maryland, and I went to the National Harriet Tubman Museum for the Underground Railroad as a part of the National Park Service. And it was like a religious experience for me. And my daughter knew that I was going to go there because it was part of our itinerary when we would go to the Lincoln Forum in Gettysburg. So we did this side trip. And just going there and seeing the landscape where Harriet did her work was phenomenal. I mean, it was marshy, it was swamp. Of course, right now there's 2 4-lane highways, one on either side, but you could picture in your mind's eye, and to see the Chesapeake River, and oh my, it was almost more than I could stand. And my daughter said, "Mom, when you go there, don't cry and don't wet your pants." So when I got back, she said, "Mom, how was it?" I said, "What did you tell me not to do?" She repeated it. I said, "Well, I did both of them." Because it was such a moving experience to see where Harriet actually was and to see the conditions under which she led folks to freedom swamps, marshes, all of that, pitch black at night, following the North Star, leading folks to freedom. It was totally remarkable. I know we have folks who are from lots of places beside Illinois, but Illinois was I have a map of Underground Railroad routes in Illinois, and being right here in Springfield, there was Springfield was a safe place for escaping slaves. And in fact, right there in Mr. Lincoln's neighborhood, his friend and neighbor, Jameson Jenkins, was a known conductor on the Underground Railroad. Jameson Jenkins also has connection to Mr. Lincoln, because he is the one who took Mr. Lincoln to the train station when he went to Washington to become the 16th president of the United States. So Springfield has a good connection for the Underground Railroad as well.
Okay,
so
we're at our almost time to cut off. So is there anything else you would like to share before we close?
Well, I would just like to thank you and the Looking for Lincoln National Heritage Coalition Trail or whatever for the opportunity to do this, and to thank all of those who tuned in tonight. And I hope that they learned something as well as enjoyed this. And I thank you very much.
Thank you, Kathryn. Well, I do want to thank everybody for tuning in. And I'm sorry, there were so many questions. We weren't able to get through them all. But that said, if you enjoyed tonight's program, in just a couple weeks, on Wednesday night, November the 4th at 7 p.m., we're going to be having another program on the Underground Railroad. And Kathryn Harris will be back, but this time she'll be back as Kathryn Harris, and also joined by Chris Filillo, and they will be having a conversation about the Underground Railroad and speaking a lot about it here in Illinois specifically. So thank you all for tuning in this evening. Thank you so much for your comments. And I did see several people asking, this has been recorded. It will be available on both the Looking for Lincoln Facebook page and our YouTube channel in the future for people who would like to come back and listen to this presentation. So thank you all so much for participating tonight. And we hope you will join us on November 4th for our next program about the Underground Railroad. Bye.
Bye.